Reminds me of working with the Red Wings. When I first started working with hockey players, Detroit Red Wings were the first ones that I worked with, and Mike Ilitch called me and he said, I understand you deal with working with getting unhealthy brains healthy. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I can't win a Stanley Cup with my Red Wings. Would you come work with them? And I said, well, why would that be? And he said, take a healthy brain and make it perform better. I was really confused because that was the assumption that a hockey player had a healthy brain. Whoa. Long story short, I've spent a lot of time working with professional athletes, with corporate executives, and with individuals and in the area of the brain and what happens. Started out in my career in, I'm a Ferris, a University of Michigan and Harvard graduate, and started out in cardiovascular medicine. And initially, we would get involved in people who had heart attacks, give them a new way of living, and they didn't change. And I kept remembering Apostle Paul, Romans 7:15. Why do I do what I don't want to do? Now, my wife interprets that for me, and it's, why do you keep doing the same stupid thing over and over? So it's somewhat the same translation, just a little bit down version from the message. But spent a lot of time, really, initially, the whole concept was, why don't we change when we know better? Why, if you look at us, why do we do certain things? Why do we not sleep at night? Why do we overreact? Why do sometimes when we're having a tough day, we go home and we totally disengage from our family? You know, why do we do that? And then in a corporate environment, we estimate that when you take people who have either health issues, relationship issues, or performance issues, 1/2 day, 4 hours a week is wasted on those areas. So if you're in business and you look at that and you're saying, what if I could capture 4 more hours a day? What do we usually, or a week? What do we usually do? We add it on and work harder. And that's been our trend, instead of really addressing the issue of, how do I know why I'm not? We call it inhibitors. How do I know why I'm not performing at my peak all the time? The great advantage of working with professional sports is you got to have everybody peaked at the same time. The difference between a winning team and a losing team isn't the talent, unless you're the Tigers or Lions. But it has to do with, how do we all hit at peak at all time, and how do we consistently stay there? So one of the things that I look at is, I say, as Christians or as people who are searching, one of the things that I see people don't have in general is passion. You know, are you passionate about everything in your life? Are you passionate about your relationship? Are you passionate about your work? Are you passionate about change? Are you passionate? And there's something in our life that usually is somewhat flat. It's just not quite where we want it. And we tend to say, you know, you only have joy or happiness at the most unhappy part of who you are. And part of you have to understand, and we're going to talk about the brain, is we don't know anything about our brain. We've talked about, you know, spiritual and emotional and physical, but nobody knows about their brain. And long-term stress just hammers your brain. It makes it change. And when it changes, you will do behaviors that you don't want to do. It can be self-medication with alcohol, trying to get to sleep. And then, of course, when you drink alcohol to go to sleep, then it changes your REM sleep, and you get your brain chemicals screwed up again. So I think it's very important, and I honestly have come to the conclusion that the greatest testimony we can be is to have passion in life. People are really confused when you're passionate, and they want to know why. And if you have that, and you can say, well, you know, I'm healthy, and I have a relationship with Christ, it's a very powerful message. So in this quest, our company's done research on 15,000 people. And they're not only from the United States, but around the world. And we have offices in Australia and South Africa. And the brains somewhat respond the same. How do you take care of that is somewhat different. But what I want to do today is to address this issue of, why do I do what I don't want to do? And is there a way that I can change this? So one of the things that I say is our brain health is the most significant contributor to our passion, our consistency, our peace, and I think very important, and listening to and responding to truth. Now let me hit that last one for just a second. Our perception, what we believe to be true, is filtered through our brain. Our brain does not store, I think it's true. Our brain is like a computer. It stores either truth or false. So if your perceptions are off, your truth is off. And our brain is so sophisticated that if we don't believe truth, or we can't accept truth with a capital T, it will redefine and store truth, which is a small t. And that becomes the truth. And when people say, well, how do you know if you have the big T or little t? I said, if you just ask the question, you don't have the big T. But it's fascinating that in working with people and both coming from a clinical background, how amazing it is to add one more element to our life, which is understanding our brain. So we bring in this new paradigm. I can tell you, for example, if you have a certain brain profile, you'll look to God and you'll say to God, what'd you do to me? You have another profile, you can look at God and say, what are you going to do for me? Those of you who are married, usually one of them is a person when something happens, your natural tendency is to blame. Often you're married to someone whose natural tendency is to accept that. Something goes wrong, it's always their fault. Something goes wrong for you, it's always someone else's fault. We're hardwired that way. It's amazing that you can take anybody's brain and shift them in that direction and they'll all respond in the same way. So I'm actually going to do something that I haven't done before, so it could bomb. But I am literally going to try to walk you through and help you understand specifically what's going on in your brain. Now, we do this through a physiological test, and it actually has 287,000 variables. So I'm going to try to do this. I've written a few books, and I have a rough time with a book because I can only narrow it down. So we'll see where it goes here. But hopefully, my goal is for you to walk away and have some insight and hopefully understand where we're going. So I think the most important thing that we need to understand, and I'll hit this very high level, is one of the things that we feel is important in order to know what's best for you is to know who you really are. Now I'm going to say this, I'm going to describe something in a medical term and then come back to say what I'm talking about. So it's going to sound complicated now, but then I'll run through that. So if somebody comes to me and they say, well, they have diabetes. I'm a guy that's been teaching over the years the one more question diagnosis. By the way, if any of you want these slides, I'm good to share them. Just let us know and we'll send them to you. So this one more question diagnosis says you keep asking the why question until there are no answers. So if somebody says I'm diabetic, I say why? Well, I'm overweight. Why? Why I eat compulsively? Why? Why have low serotonin? Why? Well, chromosome 17 SLC6A4 is underexpressed. Now you have a diagnosis. So now when you upregulate that, not only does the weight go away, so does the depression, so does the early dementia. We need to understand ourselves at that level. We really do, because otherwise we're constantly battling. Oh, I overreact. I have anger. I take risks. I drink too much. It could be the same thing. And people get hopeless because it's like, I got all these things going on. It's like, but maybe there's a common denominator. What we look at is, for you to know who you are, there's cards you have been dealt. My wife says I didn't get a full deck. That's kind of where she comes from. So there's a card that we call a body card. I don't know if you look at all the research and stuff, but the dynamics such as diabetes and heart disease, most of you know that your family history will predispose you to that. Family history predisposes to dementia and some of those things. If you don't know anything about your body card, you probably don't know that certain even diets and exercise respond differently to different body types. So what happens? If we decide to get healthy, we just do the last fad thing that came up instead of really knowing that. The second thing is we have a brain card. Most of us in this room now are very aware of things such as ADHD. We're very aware of depression. We're very aware of things such as schizophrenia, bipolar disease. We're aware of those things. We use a lot of medication to treat those things. I think one of the most important things for each of us in this room to understand that medication does not change behavior. Medication changes brain chemistry. Brain chemistry changes behavior. A drug like Prozac changes serotonin. A drug like Wellbutrin changes serotonin and norepinephrine. Adderall, Ritalin, they change dopamine. So what's important is we're manipulating brain chemistries in order to change behavior. But most of us manipulated our brain chemistry this morning because we had a cup of coffee. What you do and don't do, what you believe and don't believe, how you exercise, when you exercise, all changes brain chemistry. So very important would be, well, what if I knew what was going on with my brain? Maybe I could, instead of choose what feels good, maybe I could know what to do to help increase or decrease things that I have. The third card that we have is a background card. One of the most significant things that we've learned about the brain is the pre-12 years of age. During that development time, the first 12 years of our life, our brain is super sensitive to dysfunctional families. If you're a child of an alcoholic, if you've been abused, whether that's religious abuse or whether that's sexual abuse or whether that is even an overbearing parent, or your parents got a divorce, or a childhood friend died or something, it affects us. It changes our brain for the rest of our life. We have a behavior card in which our behaviors often, the most common reason I see people abuse alcohol is because they're actually self-medicating. So that behavior is actually trying to treat something that's going on. But that behavior is also going to affect. And then finally, there's a belief system. If you're in a marriage and you believe your wife is supposed to listen and do everything that you want her to, you're probably going to be stressed, and that'll mess with your brain. You know, your belief system drives when you're in conflict. So even though there's 287,000 variables, the way we operate, by the way, is we have this HIPAA compliant, ask a lot of family history, lots of stuff, because the correlations between depression and obesity and dementia and addiction is huge with affects your brain. Very huge, chromosome 17 with causing ADHD on one allele and compulsive disorders on the other. Lots of different things that we'd ask. But we spin it out and then we try to say, well, how do we learn to prescribe to up and down regulate things? So one of the things that I can't do, because with 287,000 variables, is let's say we have a certain increase in a neurotransmitter. It might be, well, I need to decrease the production of it and I need to burn it off. So I might, in some cases, say exercise every other day is good, exercise daily might be good. Can't go to that depth, but I can go to, hey, is there something here? And hopefully, like I said, trying it out on you. Let's start with how the brain works. Now, don't even try to memorize this, just concepts, okay? Our brain is like electrical wire. It really does carry electrical impulses. Our brain is an electrical organ. The easiest way that you can describe how it works is we have sensory input. Think of that as I walk over and I turn a light switch on and the light comes on. Sensory input. That can come anywhere from the smell, touch, taste, whatever. It can also come from a thinking, it can come from a mood, it can come from an interaction, it can come from a conflict. It flips this switch. Now the problem with flipping a switch is you're either off or on. So it's like I flip a switch and I run, or I turn it off and I'm asleep. So we need a dimmer switch. So the way that happens is in our brain we have a break in this electrical wire. As we know, electricity will not cross a broken wire. So what happens at that situation is we have a release of brain chemicals. Some of them are gas pedal chemicals, and some of them are brake pedal chemicals. So if I want to go faster, I release a gas pedal chemical, such as dopamine or norepinephrine. I want to slow down, I release a GABA. And each of those will then drive the pace of the speed after the synapse. Is it faster or slower? Am I more alert or am I not? Now you can begin to see things that might affect us. If I'm driven, and I'm going to show you an equation that shows our brain does upregulate to the point where being out of balance feels best to us. And if you choose what feels good to you as to what you're going to do, you will stay out of balance. What feels best to an alcoholic? Alcohol. What feels best to somebody who's a controlling person? Controlling. What feels best to perfectionists? What feels best to me who doesn't sleep and runs fast and go, go, go? Caffeine. I love it. Absolutely. I wouldn't drink decaf because my bladder is fine. I want the buzz. And so it's really strange how we are drawn to the things that can keep us out of balance. So first thing we have to understand, and this is where I don't want you to get lost, we have these chemicals that are released. We can play with those. We can mess with those. Short burst exercise can change something. All right, we can do that, what you eat. But here's the zinger. I said I had chemical, I had electrical, went to chemical. Goes back to electrical. Now this is important for us as Christians to understand where Apostle Paul came from when he said, why do I do what I don't want to do? We have a really strange situation where we have to now take chemical and turn it back to electrical. Now, this is important for every one of us in this room to understand. We have in our body what we call potential energy. Potential energy, we have enough to run 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, full bore. And we don't. Because, as I always said to my daughters, don't marry potential. Your mother did, and she's still waiting, It's turn it into kinetic. What is kinetic? That's usable energy. So there is a system in our body where when a neurotransmitter goes to this other side, we call it postsynaptic, it has to convert to electrical. It takes potential energy and turns it into kinetic or usable energy. What that means is, and this is where don't worry about it, it's irrelevant, but sodium comes in, potassium comes out, makes it hyperosmolar, turns it into electrical charge, and off it goes. But here's the issue. There's an enzyme that converts potential energy to kinetic energy, that the efficiency of how it operates will determine how effective your brain chemicals are. If it's highly efficient, it converts potential to kinetic quickly. If it's slow, it goes slower. Why is that important? Neurotransmitters I can change instantly. You drive your car down that road and a child runs out in front of you, you just had a change in brain chemicals. That enzyme called adenylate cyclase takes months to change. So, let's talk about something that's going to be important. We've got these chemicals. We can measure those. We can feel those if you know what you're looking for. we have this enzyme that's going to convert it. So we've got two things happening simultaneously. So one of the first things that we as individuals need to understand, and I can see my staff put VW in there because I'm a VW fan, is your engine light comes on before your car blows up. And they know my Volkswagens have engine lights on all the time, okay? So the light comes on. Each of us have a light that says, you know what? You keep going where you're going, and you're going to do something you don't want to do. But most of us don't know why that engine light came on and what to do. We just can somewhere, somehow feel something's going on. So we're going to walk now into this interaction between neurotransmitters and enzymes, and how do I know the engine light comes on? Because sometimes I get a little bit of a pushback in certain religious arenas when I say this. There's a point when your engine light comes on that there will be a trigger. I'm going to call it the Pavlovian bell. You guys remember Pavlov and the bell? You gave a dog a piece of meat, ring a bell, piece of meat, ring a bell, go back, ring the bell, dog salivates. Totally irrelevant whether the dog came from a dysfunctional doggy family or how he was potty trained. That bell went and he did it. There is a point in our life, and this is where some people, and I'll tell you where I come at from a spiritual standpoint, when that bell rings, I no longer have a choice. Now, I do have a choice before the bell rings. So I'm going to use me as an example. I'm an overexpressor of dopamine. I love that chemical. It gives me high energy. It gives me a lot of passion. It gives me a lot of creativity, connect the dots. But I have a point where the bell rings that if I ignore and I walk in at home and I have not dealt with my high dopamine, which my wife used to call me, I think the term was ass, but at any rate, it wasn't one of these really loving terms, but now she just says to me, you have high dopamine, which means you're an ass. But at any rate, I'd come home and I'd try to listen. My listening skills are shot. I'm just glazed over. And I'm smart enough to know, show her you're listening, ask questions. So you ask questions, you just ask a question that she just went over and you were ignoring and missed it. So then you're in bigger trouble, all right? It's a great place where I love to make decisions without any information after the bell rings. It's great, let's just get the decision made. It's a point where I don't sleep. It's a point where I'm scattered. So if I knew my engine light was coming on, before I did that, I could stop that, and then I have choice. So thinking in terms of, let's use alcohol, you have a bell rings, somebody drinks alcohol. Now a bell rings, somebody goes to AA. I'm not opposed to that, but I'm saying, why don't we address why the bell rang? The bell rings with us, what do? We blow up. Bell rings with us, we get kind of hole up and avoid things. Lots of different ways that bells ring. And all of us have it. And all of us have a way to respond to it. And once it's there, we just can't change. So let's see how we break that cycle. So let's talk about I'm going to talk about 3 brain chemicals. The brain chemical dopamine is a brain chemical that on the lowest level, I could run into very vegetative, I could be very depressed and literally have vegetative depression, meaning I just can't get out of bed or go. If I go all the way to the top, I literally have the diagnosis schizophrenia. Now, if I'm sitting in the middle and I've got the right amount, I'm going to be positive, I'm going to be creative, I'm going to have high energy, I'm going to be confident. But if it starts creeping up through stress or conflict or whatever, then I start decrease my listening skills, I start getting sleep disorders, I start taking risks. Many of our Christian high-profile ministers who run into sexual dysfunctions or issues have gotten to the point where their dopamine's so high because they're dancing and playing the game, and all of a sudden they don't deal with it, and it will trigger a sexual dysfunction. So you just keep going, and then, but if it gets low, you get to a certain point where I can just mellow out, you know, and then it gets a little bit lower, and I start getting, you know, kind of depressed. I start getting into certain dynamics, and again, I can start running into certain sorts of issues. So on this, and everybody is different. There are 85 different combinations. It's really neat if you can begin to recognize where you're heading so you know what's going on. So that's what we call the yellow light. When you're coming out of the green and hitting the yellow, if you can recognize it there, you can prevent many of the issues that come from happening. The other one that is very, very common, in fact, if you take these 5 populations, women, African Americans, Israeli Jews, Aborigines in Australia, and the Native American or indigenous population, meaning the American Indian in North America, all of them have higher significance of low serotonin. Why? They're all oppressed populations. So now you can remember when I said about the background at 12 years of age, if there's certain types of oppression, you're going to be more predisposed to this. So what happens, the first thing that happens, is when it starts getting low, you'll start seeing a little bit of, shall I call it, control. Now, if any of you are married, remember I just said women are predisposed to this. So if their serotonin gets low, there's a certain amount of negative thinking. There's a certain amount of control that comes in. It might be very simple. It might be they give you a list of what to do, or they start checklists, or you start checklists, if you're in that category. And you just begin to go. And the other thing is with low serotonin, there's an average weight gain of 7 pounds just because you crave carbohydrates. As it continues to get low, we get into being OCD. It's also one of the common, strange as it may be, this is one of these, there's a combination, but this is part of some of our highest performing executives. And the reason why is they get highly driven with this. Driven to the point that task will overcome relationships. It's our compulsive, shall we call it, gene, and it's highly, highly genetic. Chromosome 17 is highly sensitive. If you have a background of family history of obesity, addictions, early dementia, or depression, the stronger that relationship is, the more likely you have low serotonin. So we run into these sorts of things, and one of the things that we tend to do in our society, and don't forget, my background is neuropharmacology. That means drugs are something that I know. And I teach Johnson & Johnson and Glaxo and whatever research scientists because I say, you understand that when you use medication to change this, and I'm not opposed to that, antidepressants have saved people's lives. Do not hear that. I'm saying it's unethical to prescribe something without an alternative way to enhance the levels so that they can use less than or eliminate the drug. And the reason why is not every synapse in the brain is going to be depleted. But when you give an outside drug, every synapse is increased, even those that aren't depleted. So that means that you'll start getting some things starting to happen and some side effects from that. One of the books that I wrote is called Natural Prozac. That was one of my bestsellers, and it basically said, you know, I'm not opposed to this stuff. I'm just saying we need to prescribe a lifestyle and a way to enhance it, because the long-term effects. A study just came out yesterday. The long-term effects of antidepressants on REM sleep is devastating. Just give me good, solid research. And REM sleep is what we know that we need to stay clear and question with REM sleep is, do we develop early dementia? Which, speaking of, let's go to this one. Acetylcholine, very low, you'll see two diseases, dementia and Alzheimer's. You don't see it get real high, but very interesting study done, I think it was 2 months ago. Our company is one of these that we kind of brag and we say, yeah, if research is over a week old, we already know about it. It's old news. Our goal is to stay on top of research, so you'll see that aspect. A couple of months ago, a study came out and said people who were employed for 20 years, they tracked them, and they tracked those who loved their job and those who worked 20 years and hated their job. And the study showed that the people who hated their job developed dementia between 9 to 19 years earlier than those that enjoyed their job. Now, the difference between the 9 and the 19 has a lot to do with dementia. But I can tell you right now in our profiles, if you've had long-term stress, that can come from a marriage in conflict, that can come from kids, that can come from work, that can come from business struggles, that can come from relationship issues. There's a lot of things that come into our life. Long-term stress raises a chemical called cortisol. Cortisol drops acetylcholine. I can't tell you how many executives that we have to work with that have been really, really pushing hard on dementia prevention. We're a company that says we're going to prevent issues. We're going to prevent them in your family, your next generation. We actually map the genetics of what are your kids going to get and how do you prevent them from getting it. If they're predisposed to having ADHD, what can you do at 3 and 4 and 5 years of age to prevent that? But we got to know all the genetics to be able to map that. But that's one of the things that's very rewarding from my perspective because you see change. And we've got families that have been in the system 27 years. And I'm now on the grandkids, you know. So it's fascinating, but this is one of those things that we have to be extremely careful of when we're driven, when we're out there making it happen, and when we're under stress. And I think when you look at, I don't know about you because we didn't have good studies, but the number of dementia, people that have dementia today, it just seems, there's two reasons. One is people live longer. You know, my mom developed it at 94. Man, at 94, you better develop it. I mean, you know, she says, God never made you to live after 90. What's this all about? You know, but there's a lot of truth to that. And so I don't worry about that, but you're starting to see it so much in the early 70s and whatever. And I think a lot of it has to do with, I do think, and I don't want to go there now, but there are certain environmental dynamics that come into play here too. So starting into learning dementia prevention is very important. So now I just talked about the brain and the neurotransmitters and how they change. And most of you, every one of you should have been able to track where you were out somewhere somehow. Because we do. We get out. Why do we stay out? So now the question comes, why do I get into a pattern of doing what I don't want to do? Don't. Again, conceptually. You're going to see a term up there called arousal. One of the things that we also address is your brain has a reward center, a physiological reward center that is different than your spiritual or psychological reward center. Many people that I run into, in their heart, in their mind, you ask them, what is the number one thing you want to get out of life? And it's to be a good husband and to be a good father. That might be a spiritual or psychological. I say, but you get more rewards working, don't you? I do. That's a physiological reward. Our physiological rewards can be in direct conflict with what we want to be. By understanding an arousal people, which I am, we are people who, our brains prefer anxiety. We like going fast. We like doing multiple things. We love 15 things going on at any given time. We'd rather be anxious than depressed. You want to stress me out, ask me to curl up by a fire and read a book. That's like death sentence. But if you say it's going to be 40 below tomorrow and we're going to get 6 feet of snow, I'm going, let's go for a walk. So for me, what I'm going to do and what will work for me, this is the new paradigm of saying, what will you do versus what should you do? The reason our behavioral medicine doesn't work is we tell people what they should do. I run fast. What are people going to tell me I should do? Slow down. Yeah, I can't slow down. I won't. Also, am I going to be compliant with dietary? Probably not. You tell me I'm not supposed to eat red meat. I know that. Will I eat it? Yeah. So tell me if I eat it, what do I have to do? You have to run 2 more miles. You got it. It's a deal. Not a problem. There's other people you say, oh, 2 miles, no way. I'll eat anything you want so I don't have to get off my butt. I mean, so that's the flip side of satiation. These are people who hate anxiety. They make lists, they make boxes, they check them off. Often you're married to those people. My wife loves lists. She makes them for me and gives it to me and I lose them. But she feels better about it. Not that I lost it, but she feels better about making the list. So I'm taking this arousal personality because I want to tie in. I said neurotransmitters. I said there's this adenylate cyclase, which is this enzyme that converts it, right? The neurotransmitter can change instantly, and that's how we do upregulate certain things, is we prescribe ways to change that. Adenylate cyclase takes months. My brain has a choice of where it likes to be. So if I'm an arousal person, and I say 5 neurotransmitter, all that is a quantity. Don't get caught into 5's a real number. And adenylate cyclase is the efficiency. So my neurotransmitters, how efficient are they converted back to electrical? If I am an arousal person and I'm balanced at 10, I want 11. I like more. So I might over here on the neurotransmitter, and I'm guilty of this, that phone is with me day and night. It doesn't leave my bed. I want 24/7 communication. So what's that do? That keeps you going, right? And pretty soon you get to the point where, okay, you're running at 6. Your brain says, 11's not normal. That's not comfortable. I'm going to downregulate the amount that I convert. So it downregulates the efficiency to get you back to 10. So now what do you have to do? You have to pump that up. That means now I get up or I stay up late and do work, or I get up in the morning on Saturday morning and do some work. Whatever it is that cranks me, I'm going to start doing that. And eventually you get to the point where adenylate cyclase says, you're making so much, I'm not going to convert it. So you get to a point where you're going, if I keep doing this, and normally the reason why it's brought to your attention is someone tells you. You're not involved. You're working all the time. Your phone's in front of me. We can't have a conversation. So if you're sitting here at 7 + 3 and you say, I'm stopping, you're right, I'm quitting. This can change instantly. This takes months. You just dropped it, but you still didn't change the conversion and you hit 8. What will an arousal person do? They're not going to stand that. They're going to replace that behavior with, maybe I'll go out and exercise. I still be disengaged from the family. I might go do something else, but they don't get back into balance. This is where Apostle Paul says, why do I do what I don't want to do? Is we really begin to use activities, behaviors that are prescribed for that neurotransmitter. That's why when I said when you get out of balance, what feels best to you is keeping out of balance. And there isn't anyone in this room that doesn't have a certain element of this going on, I'll tell you that. So don't think, oh, well, that's not me. If it's not you, we can talk about denial. There's the flip side, which I don't get. I don't always understand, but it's a satiation person. And they're on the flip side where they're saying, you know what? I don't want to go fast. I'd rather be depressed than anxious. And so they're typically people who will be very good at starting lists, checking them off. We always joke in the office, who loves checking off the box? Okay, so our low serotonin people, they love checking off, they get excitement about that. They ask me and I said, what box? Right? Okay, so this personality, they love checking off boxes. You feel good. And that might happen, and you get a little upregulation. The next thing is very fascinating, because this one's always interesting. Usually after you get detailed and taking care of your box, the next thing you're predisposed to is to control people that are close to you. And that's usually a spouse. That's part of trying to keep my brain chemicals from getting out. And then once you start controlling a spouse, there's a tendency to control kids. Now, I love the way certain Christians do it because they do it through being very nice. I know a lot of Christian men that are the nicest people in the world, but subtly, there's like that elephant in the room. The family knows there is an expectation that if you don't meet, you will not fall under my approval. Now, we all have those expectations, and I'm not saying those are negative. My 3 daughters, there was never a question when they came through, are you going to go to college? No, the question is, what college are you going to, and are you going to go with a bachelor's, or are you going to go for an event? It was an unwritten, and nobody challenged that, and there was probably the unwritten, being active in your faith, and not just going to church, but getting your hands dirty. That was a part of our culture. But there's an underlying, well, you didn't quite do that right. So fascinating, because we can get into these and then all of a sudden we come back and we say, you know what, I gotta quit being so perfectionistic. I gotta loosen up. And you loosen up and you feel terrible. You feel anxious. It's driving you nuts. And that's because this enzyme, which takes months to change, doesn't go there. So the goal, basically, of the world that I live in is, although I'm talking about how you're hardwired, hardwired doesn't mean you have to stay there. We can reprogram brains. Now, I will admit there are certain things that we can't change because of certain heavy genetics. So let's say a person's brain is going too slow, so they're depressed. Maybe their gas pedal's broken. You can't push it down. Okay, pull back on the brake. It's rare that we find both broken. So there's 2 ways to go fast: push on my gas or pull back on my brake. 2 ways if I'm anxious to slow down. If I'm ADHD and my gas pedal is kind of doing a thing, well, I need to teach how to push on the brake. The way you do it is you say, the only way we will change behavior is if we get a reward out of it. You won't do what you should do. You'll only do what you will do. More people have developed hopelessness. My first book that I wrote, which was on addiction, I wrote a chapter that said, I don't believe alcoholism is a disease of denial. I believe it's a disease of hopelessness. I believe people don't want to have it because they don't think we can fix it. And therefore they deny it. There's so much hopelessness in this room, in these families in this room, from people who have said, either I want to lose weight, my wife wants to lose weight, we're depressed, or our kids have this, and nobody's ever asked even the simple question, what will you do? What will you do? So key is we have to change these neurotransmitters, just nudge them, by either decreasing the amount that are manufactured if it's too high, or stimulate the faster metabolism of it, but stay within the reward until that enzyme upregulates. This chart here might be a 6 months to a year chart. But the reality is you can, in most cases, get back to 5 + 5. So, I love what I do. And I love what I do because in the corporate environment, after 1 year, 61% of the negative environments are eliminated, or negative behaviors are eliminated. 72% of the people are following the program. Now, if you know anything about behavioral change, you're going, what? And that's because we're going to look at what you will do. And we're going to make sure you're cheating. If you're not having burgers and brats and beer on Labor Day, something's wrong. So if you're going to do it, what do you have to do? We're going to teach you how to live with this and make this change and make it worthwhile. And because of that, there's an instant feedback because we're teaching the yellow flags. You've got to improve that. So unfortunately, what I'd love to be able to do, and I can't, is I'd love to be able to give you the solution. But with 287,000 variables, it's so tailored and so specific. But essentially, yeah, I spent most of my life in corporations making them more money because their executives perform better. But you know how they perform better? I fixed relationship and health issues. If a company came in and said, make me more money at the expense of my employee, you don't get us. If you say, make my employees healthier and their relationships healthier, then you can come in. Their performance automatically increases. The other thing that I love about where research is now is mapping family genetics. It is unbelievable. And you can take grandparents, if you know that, and parents, and what diseases are you going to get? What behaviors will you likely do, and how do we change it? So at any rate, I urge you to look at those charts, and anyone who wants that. And I guess the message is, I can't imagine how if all of us were feeling really balanced and weren't doing the things that we don't want to do, the impact that would have on the kingdom. Because we just get worn out. Last thing we want to do is serve. We're tired. So, any questions?
Do you have any statistics on how people who have come to faith, does that affect brain?
Yeah, no question. So the question of faith is very interesting. So faith provides what I refer to it as brain chemistry can improve your perceptions, but until you have a spiritual change, it won't be permanent. So what happens is we typically will say to people, you know, we can fix your brain, but to stay in balance, you have to have it, that's spiritual. So where it comes into play is spiritual is when we're in conflict, our brain will be in conflict and our brain will change. And we as people do have a spiritual need that is truth with a capital T. And so when we come to faith, we either quit destroying it and it is easier to build up, or we protect it after we build it up. There's absolutely no question that we do. That is one of our, even though we work in India and we work in many different places, we say there is a spiritual component. It has to be there. Good question, Bob.
Who else has a question?
Can you just kind of give a quick review of your books?
So I've written 12 books. I started with Thomas Nelson, just a brief description of my publishing. I don't like to write books. I never wanted to write a book. I'm opposed to writing a book because I'm opposed to people following gurus. All right, so Thomas Nelson came to me and said, would you write a book? I said, I don't know how. And they said, well, we'll teach you. It was actually Victor Oliver from Oliver Nelson. And I said, well, if you're going to teach me, then I need to have a book contract for 3 books. So the first 3 books came out, and it's a series called Help Yourself. One's on addiction, one's on weight, and it's called Kids Don't Want to Use Drugs. From there, they signed 10 more books. But I had said to them, I said, you know, we got a lot of good authors in the Christian world. God's called me to be a seed planter, and I don't want to write to the audience. I want to write to the New Agers. They came in our world. I want to go get them. And so the last 2 books, which Nelson actually bought and then turned around and said, we're just selling them to Christians, you're right, came out of HarperCollins, and that's Natural Prozac and Peak Performance Living. Peak Performance Living is a book that's geared towards executives. One of the things that we didn't go into is there are 12 different profiles of how all of us fall. We can literally say to you, if you fall in a profile, here's how likely you will be to follow this program. Here's how likely, if you do follow it, this will change. Here are the things that it's very predictive medicine. Actually, one of the things that we've been blessed with is our predictive analytics. We won Microsoft's Healthcare Company of the Year with our predictive analytics. That's exciting to be able to say to people, this is where you're going. If you're not there yet, this is where you're going with facts. So those are my books that I have. And then I have books in the educational system for suicide and crisis.
Joe, just one quick question. Which book sums up, said if you only read one book of yours, which one would get us there?
Well, I've never read any of them. Honest, the joke that they come from the, and this goes back to, remember that arousal personality? Writing a book is fun. I could care less if I sold any copies. And it drives my publisher nuts because he says, it's final edit. And I said, I can't do it. I've already done this. So somebody else has to edit it. I'd say Peak Performance Living. Now, if you have a family history of depression, Natural Prozac. If it's really trying to overcome mood versus kind of looking at how do I just get the edge going, and I don't have a real lot of stuff going on, but Peak Performance. Yeah, so.
I know obviously everyone is so different. There's so many variables for finding answers, but can you generally say that if you're in a rut or you see problems or you're not doing the things you want to do, does putting yourself out of your comfort zone, putting your brain in conflict and kind of conditioning your brain by taking those first steps, is that generally a good way to go?
Well, let me take a risk here because I don't want it to sound this simple. If you're an overexpressor of dopamine, we know short burst exercise every other day will burn up your dopamine. It stimulates tyrosine hydroxylase. Not every day, in between stretch. We also know watch the foods that contain tyrosine that you eat because that manufactures it. So taking those 2 particular steps, it's also, for me, I have to quit listening to Led Zeppelin and go to Chris Tomlin. Yeah, and it's like, Chris is fine, but Zeppelin, I mean, there is Led Zeppelin. I mean, those of us in my era, there is nothing since Led Zeppelin. But that really cranks my brain chemistry. So those are a couple of things that say, all right, that's going to drop it down. Now, what if I am a low serotonin person? And by the way, many of you will be a combination, so this is where I get into trouble. If you're low serotonin, we know that if you eat a complex carbohydrate food 2 hours after your highest protein meal, you'll break the competition of getting tryptophan into the brain, which converts to serotonin. We also know that exercise 4 days in a row is going to be helping to pick that up. These are some of the techniques. If you have diabetes or predisposed to diabetes, we know that 10 minutes of exercise after your latest dinner is better than 30 minutes of exercise earlier. So if you're predisposed to diabetes, we would prescribe for you a 10-minute walk after your evening meal. There's a lot of different things like that that come in. Where does nutrition come in? When you're talking about acetylcholine, that's one of those really bizarre chemicals that is manufactured. So it's kind of like acetic acid and choline make acetylcholine. When it breaks down into acetic acid and choline. So it's kind of like I put gas in my car, drive it, take the exhaust, and refuel it. That's why I think we run into losing the edge later on in life, because if you just lose a little bit of it, it's not going to be recycled. That's where I sometimes come in with supplements such as a soy lecithin or phosphatidylcholine. But it's all a combination and all different ways of thinking and moving and where the behaviors. But those are just a few tips that have significant impact on people's lives. The other thing just to understand is your brain, how you're hardwired drives where you enjoy where you work. In our company, we all know everyone's brain profile, not necessarily why, but we know it. And so when we have a staff meeting, whenever there's projects go into 4 phases. There's a conceptualizing phase, an implementing phase, a stabilizing phase, and an optimizing phase. Our team will not only describe the purpose of the meeting, because the purpose of the meeting will drive who should attend. So when we conceptualize, you better bet they invite me, because that's my strength. I don't want my CFO in that room. I don't want them. This is a dream about what we can do right now. But I am totally incompetent when we get to stabilization. I want my CFO to take over. And I don't want to be in the room because I am incompetent. It is amazing when you know what you do and how you're hardwired and you get out of the way, because if I try to get in on budgets, I just am disruptive. I hate it. I'm no good at it. And my joy goes away and I just am obnoxious. But that creative mindset is where I stay, and I'm not even invited. And it's really easy when you know that's how you're hardwired to make your team. We got written up for saving Dow Corning $180 million with that alone, taking hardwire in 1 year. And taking hardwired and putting the right people in the right spot at the right time, performing at the right level. So it's a fun stuff. I mean, it is, and I love it. I love it because of the results. Any other question?